Hello, welcome to our rock blasting course. In this class we will be introducing ourselves, presenting the course, as well as reviewing some initial concepts, which are fundamental, especially for those who are not so familiar with rock blasting. And we need to have these concepts fresh in our minds, so that we can move forward with our classes. Mainly because they are the basic definition of the activity and we need to know the activity well, so that we can know its characteristics. So, let's go to today's class. Before starting today's class, it is important to say that our course is aimed both at professionals who already work in rock blasting, or those professionals who want to work, or even students who are preparing to work in the area, as well as for those professionals who work in any related or parallel area, who have any interaction with rock blasting, whether in mining or civil engineering, and wish to know the activity in more detail. Our course is quite comprehensive, so even if you already have experience, we believe you will benefit from it. It will serve to review some important concepts, as well as learn some details of the activity that may not be part of your daily life. As for professionals and students who wish to work with rock blasting, they will have a great opportunity to see the activity in details, where this knowledge will give them a very solid and comprehensive basis, so that they can start with a good base of concepts and knowledge of the activity. While professionals working in parallel areas will be able to know much more about rock blasting, allowing them to interact more assertively between areas, and gain more understanding of the entire process. We will try to share as much knowledge as possible, but we will do it in a simple way so that everyone can have clarity on the topics, and thus, even those who still don't have much contact with the activity on a daily basis, can understand it clearly. Also, always at the end of the class we leave our email and we have the comment fields of the course platform, so that you can contact us at any time to exchange ideas and experiences, as well as to take and clarify doubts and questions that may arise midway. So, please feel welcome. We are happy to have you here, and we hope that throughout our course we will be able to share knowledge and experiences. The objectives of our course are based on 3 pillars. Where the first is to know the explosives well, knowing their characteristics and properties, so that we know what we are dealing with and so we can use their full potential to produce the best possible results. The second is to analyze the main techniques, concepts and fundamentals of the application of these explosives in rock blasting, both mining and civil engineering, as this will give us the theoretical basis necessary to act with greater assertiveness and efficiency in our activities. Finally, we take the opportunity to create the possibility of exchanging experiences, analyzing theoretical scenarios and practical scenarios, through examples of the application of these explosives, so that they serve as simulations of the different scenarios that we can have, both operational and technical, in as broadly and clearly as possible, so that we can all get the best out of this course. Before we present the topics of our course, I would first like to introduce myself. My name is Bruno Pimentel. I am a Brazilian mining engineer, graduated from the Federal University of Pernambuco, here in Brazil. I have been working in rock blasting for about 15 years. I work directly carrying out blasting almost every day, working both in the operational and technical areas, and now I would like to take this opportunity to share a little of what I learned, as well as expose myself to new learning opportunities and exchanges of experience. I have already worked here in Brazil in several operations, as well as having the opportunity to work outside the country, where I spent some time in Spain and some more in Canada, and all this gave us scenarios and practical application examples that will be very useful throughout of our classes. I leave here my LinkedIn profile if you want to have a little more detail, just access the link that will have more details about the activities we perform in each company. I'll also leave here my professional presentation. If you want, just stop the video a little and take a look. It's the same one available on the LinkedIn link, but it's available here for those who don't have LinkedIn or just want to take a quick look. I will also leave here a summary of my resume, with our academic background and with some information about the operations I went through and the main activities I performed in each company. So please feel free to clarify any curiosity you may have, or if there is a need for additional information, I am open to providing and exchanging ideas about these experiences. In addition to LinkedIn at the end of the class, we leave our email contact, where you can also get in touch if you are interested. Now I'm going to stop talking about myself. It's just a presentation and to allow a better exchange of ideas with those who want to, so without further delay, let's go to one of the main topics of today's class, which is the presentation of the contents program for our course. Our course is divided into 10 modules, in which we try to divide as rationally and logically as possible the main issues related to rock blasting. Over these 10 modules, we have an initial total of 100 classes. We want to make it clear that the main content of the course was divided into these 100 classes, but that at any time, if we find it necessary to implement other content or add a class on a specific topic, it will be done. Where we usually add in the last module, that the module of extra classes, but these extra classes are only available for those who want to continue complementing their learning. No one is obliged to take these classes, and you can receive your certificate as soon as you complete the 100 standard classes. The 100 classes, divided over the 10 modules of our course, were designed to more fully cover our theme, which is rock blasting, and they will be periodically revised to adapt to current practices, as well as to complement or correct some point that may not have been so clear to everyone. So we start our course with Module 1, where we will look at some initial concepts of rock blasting, then we will look at the history of explosives and thus some generalities of the applications of explosives. This is a very basic module for those who already have some knowledge of the area, or even if you have already participated in any of our other courses, you have already attended similar classes, but we believe that this introduction is very interesting and curious, so that we can get to know our course and also the use of industrial explosives in general. But if you are already in the area or have this knowledge, you may feel a little frustrated, so we ask for a little patience and we will soon move on to Module 2, where we will start talking a little more deeply about the characteristics of the explosives used in the rock blasting. So, in Module 2 we will see some concepts and the main properties of explosives. In Module 3, we will get to know the main explosives that we have available on the market today, to carry out rock blasting. We will have a general class on the main explosives and then we will have some specific classes on the explosives that are most used today in rock blasting. Then we will go to Module 4, where we will get to know the accessories that we have available to use in rock blasting. In it we will have 2 general classes presenting all the accessories and then some classes detailing the ones that are most used, where we will see their main characteristics and how they are applied. Then we move on to more practical topics about the application of explosives, through Modules 5 and 6, which is where we will see open pit rock blasting, other types of blasting, secondary blasting, pre-cutting techniques and some other types of detonations that we can have in the open pit, in mining and civil engineering. Then we have Module 7, where we will talk about underground rock blasting, both tunnel and gallery development blasts and production blasts. So, it is in these 3 modules that the most practical parts of our course, which refer to the application of explosives in rock blasting, are concentrated. Then we will move on to the last modules of the course, where we will have Module 8, which is dedicated to the blasting process, which shows us the care we have to take during and after the blasting, as well as we will see the main techniques that we can use both for the quality control of operations and blasting, as well as to evaluate their results. Finally, we will still have the last 3 classes of Module 8, which are more theoretical, and address the behavior of the explosive during detonation and the response of the rock to the fragmentation process. This is a very important module because it brings us the central concepts so that we can have control over the result, quality, performance and completion of the work of our rock blasters. It is certainly one of the most important modules that we have in the course. Then we have a fundamental module, which aims to guarantee the safety and effectiveness of our detonations, so that they are carried out in the best possible way. It is Module 9 that will deal with safety and impacts on the environment, where we will see all aspects regarding the use of explosives and the due care that we must take. Finally, we will have Module 10 that ends the course, where we will have 2 classes on the selection of explosives and another on the basic calculations, which are basic classes to complement our content. It is also in this module that we will include extra classes when we feel it is necessary to add more content to the course. Each module has an evaluation. It is a simple assessment with 10 objective questions that review the subjects and concepts seen in the module. The minimum passing score is 70%, but you can retake the evaluation as many times as necessary. So, in summary, we will have 100 classes, which will be divided into 10 modules, and the course workload is between 80 to 90 hours including the time of the evaluations. The course schedule is the minimum release of 4 classes per week, so we will have approximately 16 to 20 classes per month, which makes our course last more or less 6 months. But as the classes are ready, they will be released on the platform, so, if you start the course at some later time, it is possible that you already have several classes released and so you can complete the course in less time. And those who want to do it intensively at some point will have this availability, as the classes will all be available on the platform, and thus, they will be able to complete the course according to their availability. The period in which the course will be available for completion is 1 year. We know, however, that there are professionals who work or who study, and that, if they have a justification for not being able to conclude within that period, we will try to see what can be done in relation to this issue. And as we said before, we are always available by email or platform comments. And, at the end, you have our contacts, so please, if you have any need, look for us here. We are available to exchange ideas, exchange experiences, as well as answer any questions you may have about the course or during the classes. In case of curiosity, doubt, or if you wish to mention or add any subject here in the course, within any module, please contact us or send us an email requesting it, as this content is dynamic and constantly changes, since we are always trying to cover or add more content so that our course is as complete as possible. Now that we know a little about the course, the modules and the classes, let's move on to the initial topics, in which we will make a very brief and simple presentation of what rock blasting is and why to use rock explosives. So, we start with the basic definition of the activity, where we have that rock fragmentation is the set of activities and techniques used to transform a body of rock into fragments that can be excavated and that can be transported, either for use of the rock, or for use of the space being occupied by the rock. There is a challenge for children, which consists of asking what do you have to do for you to carry a stone that you cannot carry from one place to another? And the answer is simply, it's just to break the stone and take it to pieces. And this is nothing more than the rock's fragmentation. You have a rock that you can't take, but you need to take it either because you want that rock or because you want to remove that rock from the location in order to use the location, and what you have to do is break that rock into several fragments, that it will then be possible to move these fragments to another location. In the same way that rock fragmentation also covers activities used for terrain modification in civil works and constructions. For example, when you have a terrain that you want to be leveled and for that you need to remove some of the rock or soil, this removal of material for leveling a terrain is also within the general definition of activities that encompass rock fragmentation process. Because when you take a quantity of rock from a place you are extract or fragmenting that body of rock, that is, fragmenting it into portions. So, the operations of moving some material, from one area to another, are part of the general definition of what rock fragmentation is. When we look at the rock fragmentation activity, we can see 6 main objectives, which we will have to take into account to carry out the rock fragmentation process, and we will see that these objectives will be even more specifically applied when we refer to the use of explosives to carry out rock fragmentation. The first objective of fragmenting the rock is directly linked to the definition that we have just mentioned, which is the removal of rock for industrial use of this rock or for carrying out works in the place where this rock is occupying. So, the very definition of the rock fragmentation activity already gives us its first main objective, which is to allow or facilitate the removal of this material, so that it can be used or so that the site can be used. The second objective is the detailed specification of the need we have to fulfill the first objective, since generally, it is necessary to make a fragmentation or, as we usually say, a granulometric distribution of sizes, which is suitable for the excavation technique or material removal that we are going to use. Because it would be useless for me to fragment the rock into very large blocks that I cannot remove, so the rock fragmentation activity needs to guarantee a minimum acceptable size for the removal of material. So, I not only need to fragment the rock, but I also need to do it in fragments that are suitable for the removal of this material to fulfill the first objective, which is to remove the material to use it or to use the site. The third objective of our rock blasting, mainly with explosives, is to form a pile of material that is suitable for excavation, that is conducive to facilitating the removal of this material. It's no use doing a fragmentation where I spread this material in all directions and have a job of collecting each fragment from kilometers away. So, I need the material to be disposed of properly, to facilitate its removal, as this is the reason I am carrying out a fragmentation process, which is to allow the removal of this material. So, with the exception of direct excavation, I need a pile format and material arrangement that not only allows for, but also facilitates, this removal as easily as possible. The fourth objective is to cause minimal impact, or better yet, to cause no damage to the remaining rock and the structures present at the site. I want to carry out my rock fragmentation process in a way that I can remove it, so that I can do my activity, but without causing any damage, avoiding landslides, that is, causing as little damage as possible. We will look at this in more detail during our classes. So, I have to carry out my activity of breaking the rock, that is, fragmenting it to allow or facilitate its removal, but without damaging the rocks, structures and facilities that may be close to this block of rock that I need to remove. My fifth objective is to do this without generating environmental impacts. And we will see further on, that during the use of explosives for rock fragmentation, that is, during our blasting, we are subject to causing environmental impacts. So, we want to minimize these impacts and whenever possible not cause any impact during our activities. Finally, of course, we want to optimize the cost of our operation, including subsequent operations. As we said, the rock fragmentation activity aims to facilitate the removal of material, so I want not only to facilitate, but to make this removal optimized, faster and in the most economical way possible. These objectives apply to any of the rock fragmentation processes that we will discuss next, but primarily to our rock blasting. So, we can generally consider that these are the main objectives that we have to keep in mind throughout our course. For when we say that we need to carry out a rock blasting, we must keep in mind that we need to do this blasting so that the rock can be removed, that the fragments generated by the blasting are suitable for their excavation, that the material launching pile is adequate for the equipment that will remove this material, that does not cause damage to what is left behind, that does not generate environmental impacts, that the activity is done safely, and, of course, that this is done optimally with the lowest possible costs. So, whenever we are in our classes, throughout the course modules, we have to be thinking about carrying out our blasts, whether in the open pit or underground, pursuing these objectives during our rock blasting. When we talk about rock fragmentation, we can divide this activity more or less into four main types. First, we can have mechanical fragmentation, which is when we use mechanical equipment to fragment the rock, or even, in soft rocks, we can do the excavation directly. An example is when I use an excavator to carry out a direct excavation, or when I use a hydraulic breaker or a diamond wire cutter to cut or break the rock into smaller fragments. That is, when I use any technique that fragments the rock or remove the rock, using mechanical equipment, I have a mechanical fragmentation process. When I use the force of water to carry out rock fragmentation, which is a process generally used in sedimentary rocks, close to rivers or seas, I am referring to hydraulic fragmentation. When I use components, for example, expansive mass to break the rock, which, as the name implies, when I use it, I place it inside holes or fractures in the rock, and the mixture of its components makes it expand, and this expansion it causes fissures inside the rock and it expands until the rock breaks. In this case we call it cold fragmentation, where there are other types of processes and chemical products that we could fit in here. And finally, we have our rock blasting, which is the focus of our course, and as the name implies, it is based on the method of applying explosives, so that, through their detonation, they will fragment the rock. So, our course is based on the fourth rock fragmentation method, and everything we'll be referring to will be rock blasting. At some point, we will be able to cite or mention the other techniques, but really this course is exclusively referring to the blasting of rocks with explosives both in mining and in civil engineering. Some people often ask, if I have other ways to perform rock fragmentation, such as mechanical extraction, cold fragmentation or even hydraulic fragmentation, why use explosives in this process? Is it not more dangerous? Isn't it more difficult than using another technique? And to answer these questions we have here 5 answers or main points that lead us to use explosives to carry out most rock fragmentation activities. The first point is because there is rock that does not come out with direct mechanical excavation, rock that is very hard, that none of the other methods are efficient to break and remove this material. And the only really efficient technique to do that, when it comes to hard and competent rocks, is through the use of explosives. The second is because cold fragmentation is limited. So, generally, cold fragmentation with the use of expansive masses, or even hydraulic and mechanical fragmentation, has its limitations, and each of these techniques will require certain conditions to be efficient. For example, a mechanical extraction is mainly aimed at soft rocks, where excavators can remove the rock with some ease, directly. Cold fragmentation, with an expansive mass, is generally used in small quantities, because they do not have a high productivity, that is, they cannot meet other production demands, or the types of extraction through the use of diamond wire equipment. Usually they are only useful for cutting rock blocks and do not have high production rates or perform other types of extraction. Thus, each technique has its limitations in the scenarios in which they are applied, and when they are not efficient, the single most comprehensive technique, of course, if performed correctly, is the technique of blasting rocks with explosives, where we have the most flexible technique of all in the use of explosives. The third point is that through rock blasting with explosives, we speed up a series of works and demolitions, because in order to remove this rock, to fragment it without the use of explosives, the process would be very expensive and late. For example, the demolition of a building, if you need to demolish it mechanically, you will have to go step by step, and that takes days and even months. But already with explosives, after everything is prepared, in a few seconds we have the demolition of a building. In the same way that crushing a rock with hydraulic or mechanical equipment, for example with a breaker, or even with cold fragmentation, would take a long time and could cost much more and in a less efficient way than through the use of explosives. We still have the fourth point, because the use of explosives is the most economical way for us to fragment the rock. There is no other energy or method as cheap as the use of explosives in rock fragmentation. When there is any need for further fragmentation, for loosening the material, or for a larger release to facilitate excavation, and also to facilitate the following steps in processing that material, the energy of the explosive is the cheapest energy one has to carry out this work, giving a high productivity, in a more economical way and to meet any scenario. In fact, the use of explosives is the technique that best adapts to different needs, which is why large mining and large works that produce massively and really need rock fragmentation to meet their production, they do it through the rock blasting. And especially, in the scenario where we have hard rocks and high productivity is needed, the energy and flexibility of the explosive are used to make it possible and economically viable. Finally, we even have scenarios in which other processes could be used, such as direct mechanical excavation in a very soft rock, but even so, the use of explosives can provide better fragmentation and loosening of the material, and this allows the excavation and transport of this material occur more efficiently and faster, as well as it can directly contribute to the rock processing steps. Another question that arises very commonly, mainly asked by those who are not so familiar with the use of explosives, is why work with explosives? Because when we talk to a friend, or if we talk to someone that we work with explosives, people are even scared and start to joke right away saying that we are a bomb man. They ask if it's not dangerous, and everyone is curious about it. Working with explosives today is extremely safe, there is no discussion about that. Of course, there are always some accident events, some events that end up happening, but that happens in all areas. It's much easier for you to leave your house and get hit by a car than it is to actually have an explosive accident, of course, when you do it right. In the same way, we hear a lot about those who are afraid of flying, and that it is much easier to die in a car than flying in an airplane. But we understand the view of outsiders, who do not understand the area, because when we look at the potential for risk, we know that flying in an airplane has a much greater potential for risk, just as handling explosives has a much greater potential for risk, despite its low probability of occurring. So, while there is a possibility of surviving a car crash, and a plane crash, despite being very rare, the chances of survival are practically non-existent. And we have the same thing with explosives, because nowadays they are very safe. It is very rare to have an accident with an explosive, but when it does occur, it has a very high risk potential, which is why it generates great astonishment. We will talk more about this throughout our course, as it is not a topic for this class, but accidents with explosives are usually linked to human error. So, the human factor is what makes explosives dangerous, but when used correctly the danger is minimal. Today we can say that the explosives we use are really safe when handled correctly. So, when I have to answer the question of why work with explosives? First, I always say that working with explosives is very interesting and exciting. Everyone is curious about this, it's very beautiful to see a detonation going off. The rock being blasted is really amazing. I usually say that through blasting, through explosives, we shape our world. We draw our artwork, the face of the earth, the surface, and then we go on shaping it. We'll be drawing it as we're doing our blasting. So, it is certainly quite interesting and curious to work with explosives. The second justification is because it is a very important activity both in mining and construction. It is a differential activity that, if it were not for the rock blasting, many mines would not be able to operate economically. Several works could not be carried out effectively. Thus, if it were not for the technique of using explosives for rock fragmentation, much could not be done. So, it is a primary activity in the mining sector, in the civil engineering sector and in some other sectors that may need rock blasting. The third point is that there is a shortage of skilled labor, mainly due to the fact that explosives are involved in the restrictions on their use. So, the few people who have experience are usually working in the area and don't even dedicate themselves to divulging or disseminating their knowledge. There really is a shortage of skilled labor. I've been through this, and the difficulty one has to find someone who really has experience with the use of explosives is very great. Rock blasting is an area where it is difficult for those who work to find a job. Of course, depending on other characteristics, personal characteristics, training characteristics, the area of activity. It all has an impact on getting a job. But looking only at the knowledge and the use of explosives in rock blasting, we really have a hard time finding a workforce that has training, knowledge and is specialized enough in the area. And finally, many companies offer a differentiated salary for the area. Firstly, because of the danger of handling explosives. Even in some countries, as is the case in Brazil, The law determines that everyone who handles and who works directly with explosives receives a hazard allowance in their salary. For example, here in Brazil, all those who work directly with the handling of explosives and rock fragmentation receive an additional 30% to their base salary. So, this already makes the salary increase compared to other areas. And, here in Brazil, this goes from the helper to the engineers responsible for the blasting. Everyone gets that extra 30%. Just clarifying that this is aimed at those who handle the explosives, it is not aimed at those who carry out parallel activities, for example the administrative, support, drilling staff. If you don't have direct contact with explosives, you are not entitled. In addition to this as we mentioned, due to the shortage of manpower, personnel who work with explosives have generally received good offers of salary and bonuses. So, when you compare two people who have similar activities or positions, for example where one is in charge of something and the other is in charge of explosives work, usually the one who works with explosives has a slightly higher salary, due to this shortage of manpower. Because of the level of assertiveness that is necessary in the activity, it is treated in a different way. So, these are the main reasons why working with explosives is really interesting. It is a differentiated area, a curious area. It is an area that excites. When we are going to carry out a blast, it is very good to see the team vibrating when the blast comes out, when it fulfills the objectives. It's like having fireworks show at each blast, during the release of that material. It's really interesting and exciting. There are all the other reasons that we talk about here, but it is an area that we always recommend. Whenever a student asks about the mining or construction area, why or how they can enter the area, we always give these justifications. And, of course, depending on the desire to act, there are several segments and careers that one can follow in the field of use explosives. To end today's class, I would like to talk a little about the job market for those who work with explosives. Because many people who work in related areas and even many who work in the area as blasters and engineers are not aware of the scope of the job market nor the markets in which they can operate. In a simplified way, we will give here some examples of where those who are professionals in rock blasting can work. The first major market, which is responsible for most of the labor, are mining companies, with the mining area being the main contractor for skilled labor in rock blasting. They are the ones who use the greatest amount of explosives to remove rock for economic use. So, mining has the largest specialized workforce, and they will use everything from assistants to carry out basic loading services, to foremen, supervisors, technicians, engineers, specialists, blasting operations manager, and others. Miners are the great workforce when it comes to blasting the use of explosives in rock blasting. Then we have civil works companies that build roads and large constructions that will always need to remove rocks and will need to use explosives for that. The third market would be that of demolition companies, which demolish structures, buildings. They also need specialized labor. The implosion, which is the technique that uses explosives to carry out demolition, is an example of another area of activity, although the workforce is very specialized, as those who work with conventional rock blasting have no experience in these areas. But it is an area of activity for those who work in the area of rock blasting, and that it is possible to act, if you have the opportunity. We have explosives manufacturers, as most manufacturers need people to carry out tests, and even provide outsourced services, providing specialized labor in blasting for the provision of services, thus having a great demand for professionals who work or who wish to work in the rock blasting area. Service providers that provide drilling and blasting services. They also need skilled labor in the use of explosives. There are consulting companies for mining and construction. Specific consultations for rock blasting that use manpower, whether to carry out tests, or to carry out field studies or to carry out the consultancy itself, professionals with greater training and specialists. The demand is not great, but they use this workforce. There are companies that develop equipment, software and programs for the area of rock blasting with explosives. And of course, they also need people in that area. There are several other areas that also need rock blasting labor, which has a lower demand, but it exists, such as the oil industries, mineral research, and others, as they also use blasting to carry out some activities. There are several possibilities that often, even people who are in the area do not know, and usually when they leave a company, they focus on looking for a job only in the area in which they already worked. For example, those who worked with construction only look for jobs in construction companies, when there are a number of other companies or industries that need the workforce. Of course, some will pay more than others. Some will need more training and greater expertise, but in general these are the main areas of activity for the job market for those who work with blasting. In this class we know a little about rock blasting. This class is very simple. We wanted to introduce the topics of the course. Then you can read the presentation calmly. It was a presentation of rock blasting, the initial concepts and areas of activity, and this needs to be clear to everyone, because when we mention it throughout the course, it is necessary that everyone has an open and comprehensive mind about the blasting process, so that those who are in the mining area do not think only about mining, but rather can see the blasting occurring in any other area and what would impact the design or the execution. We will have an introductory class on the generalities of the use of explosives, precisely to expand our mind a little more, as there are some concepts that may not seem useful in the daily life of those who are in a specific area, but if we look at another area, they will make a lot of sense. So that's it. We're staying here. Our objective today was just to present the course and these initial topics, and we don't want to take too much time from you with these topics that don't bring great concepts and news. Here we leave our contacts. If you have any questions, you can send us an email or leave a comment here on the platform. Those who also want to exchange ideas or even share some material will be grateful to be in contact with you. We are always available. Thank you very much for this class, and I hope to see you in next class. A big hug and see you later.